Welcome to the final session of the 2022 or 15th Teaching and Learning Symposium. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Allison Gibbs and I'm the director of the Center for Teaching Support and Innovation. And I'll just start by thanking you for joining us on this beautiful Friday. Thank you to everybody who's participated this week, the last 3 days. It's been wonderful. I've had a wonderful time connecting with folks I haven't seen in a long time, far too long, and meeting some really great, wonderful new people and being inspired by your creativity and the care that you're showing for your students and for each other. And it's been really wonderful. To start this final session of the symposium, I'm happy to introduce the university's Vice President and Provost, Professor Cheryl Regier. Thanks for being here, Cheryl, and I'll pass it to you.
Thanks very much, Allison. And let me just say how delighted I am to be taking part in this closing plenary of now 15th annual. That's quite amazing. Teaching and Learning Symposium, and to say what I hope will be some words at what I hope is the last of these kinds of Zoom. I know we're talking about online innovations and all the rest, but you know, over the last couple of weeks, I've had the amazing opportunity to meet with faculty members, many of whom are right here in this virtual space right now, but in person. I met with them in person. And this week, just as an example, we had 2 real life celebrations, one welcoming new faculty members to the University of Toronto, and the second celebrating the success of those who were granted tenure and continuing status over the last 2 years. And I've had the chance to talk to faculty members in governance meetings, all of which have moved back to in-person formats now. And I've run into people on the street and in lineups for the second cup. And as I walked through Hart House to the Gallery Grill, and I've just been reminded with renewed excitement about the joy of working with such talented and committed colleagues. And while I feel that as we interact online, I don't, it's amazing the way the energy comes through in such a different way when we can actually see each other in person. And I've also met students in these various places and had actual face-to-face meetings with student leaders. And throughout these discussions, these informal discussions, several themes have emerged, and they intersect perfectly with the discussions that you've been having over the last couple of days as you've been looking to design for the future. And while these themes were also evident in many ways through COVID, they've become more animated for me through these informal conversations. And people have provided brilliant examples through the conversations that I've been able to hear. So the first theme that I've really heard relates to the focus on teaching and the pride associated with teaching at the University of Toronto. I know from various sources that faculty members have been taking advantage of the courses offered through CTSI in record numbers, including registering for and completing the ACUE certificate in teaching, which I know is a huge undertaking and a tremendous commitment. I know that people in this room have developed instant seminars to help colleagues learn more about new modes of instructions and helped others use new platforms and new functions and new tools for collaborating, and that it's really been the teaching leaders in this conference that have done that. And supported in no small part by CTSI, faculty members are engaging huge effort in honoring colleagues by nominating them for teaching awards, both in the university. We've had exceptional nominations for our internal teaching awards, but also just huge success at the international and national level, where we are justly winning awards at an incredible rate. And so these individual awards, that's one way of external recognition of the teaching excellence at U of T. But a second is collective recognition. And one example of this collective recognition is that the 2022 Times Higher Education rankings of the employability of our graduates placed U of T 12th in the world, and number 4 among public universities following Oxford, Cambridge, and University of Tokyo. So that really underlines the value others are seeing in what our students learn here at University of Toronto. A second theme, which is not related, is teaching innovation. And while there's no question that enormous innovation occurred prior to COVID, it has certainly become turbocharged during COVID. And next week, I'm presenting the key performance indicators to government, to our governing council. And I'm reporting what you already know, that the number of registrations in online courses went from 9,500 in the fall of 2019 to over 500,000 in the fall of 2020. So that was a huge push for innovation. And overall, from May 2020 to May 2021, more than 90% of our undergraduate courses were online. So that's absolutely astounding, would have been unthinkable before, and is forced innovation. But not only that, another way that that's been recognized is that 3 years ago, the province of Ontario enacted strategic mandate agreements with all universities, and we've got 10 targets that we have to hit on metrics. And at some point, this is going to be linked to the allocation of a significant proportion of our operating grant, although that's been put off now because of COVID. But I'm really excited to report that U of T exceeded all of our 21-22 targets, including experiential learning. And what happened was that our experiential learning increased significantly while we were online during COVID. So I had all kinds of ideas about why that might be, but in chatting with colleagues last night at Hart House, I heard about incredibly creative examples of what people did and how they engaged students in experiential learning, either by creating labs out of household items or by creating group work where naturally forming groups were occurring, such as in Chestnut residence. So quite amazing to think about the creativity around this. And the final theme that I just want to touch on is supporting students. And I know that you're talking a lot about that, but you really did make students feel cared for in the midst of COVID by bringing them virtually into your homes and introducing them to your lives, but also the flexibility and compassion. And I've really heard that from students. Students have talked about it in governance meetings. The student leaders talk about it, and they really did feel supported. And the other way that this is shown is we just had our first instance of a new survey called the Student Experience in Research Universities, or CIRU. It's the first time we did it at the undergraduate level, and it revealed that the vast majority of our undergraduate students said that they felt supported and were able to access their instructors when needed. And this is really important because University of Toronto was, of all the universities in the cohort, we were the most remote, being in the city of Toronto, and yet our students felt a tremendous amount of support. So I just wanted to say thank you. I've just never felt prouder at being in this university to see all the work that people have done. And I am so grateful that all the time you commit to thinking about teaching and developing new and engaging teaching practices, but also the time that you have engaged in just being here in the last 2 days and talking about teaching and sharing your knowledge with others. So I'm very grateful to CTSI and all of those who organized this and for bringing us together like this, and all the volunteers and presenters and all of you for your invaluable time. And I really look forward to hearing your comments in this plenary.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. That was a really wonderful way to start the final session of the symposium. Your comments on connection and the comments about the celebration of teaching at U of T are really what the symposium is about each year. And thank you for highlighting those. So this session is our bookend to the design thinking activities of the prior 2 days. In order to construct this bookend, we've invited 3 academic leaders from across the university to join the discussion about the future of teaching and learning. To ask them to include their own insights and reflections on the 3 framing questions in the symposium, and they'll also respond to the work that was generated by those of you who were able to participate in our design thinking sessions, particularly respond to the big ideas that you've proposed. So I'll start by giving a very brief introduction to our panelists, and maybe I'll start with Don. I'll go in alphabetical order by first name. So the first of our panelists is Don Boyce. He's the academic director in the Arts and Science Online Learning Academy, and he's a professor in the teaching stream in geography and planning in the Faculty of Arts and Science. Don has been at the forefront of digital pedagogy for a very long time. He's taught in online hybrid high-flex modes for many years, and I know we'll greatly appreciate his insights. Also on the panel today, we have Rhonda Mcewen. Rhonda is Vice Principal Academic and Dean at the University of Toronto Mississauga campus, and she's a Professor of Emerging Technology at the Institute of Communication, Culture, Information, and Technology. Her work is really on the cutting edge, focusing on mobile and tablet communication, virtual reality, communicating with robots, and social networks. And our third panelist is Susan Mccann, the Vice Provost of Academic Programs and Innovations in Undergraduate Education. And she's a professor in the Department of Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. Susan's research is in engineering education, and she specifically has interests in universal instructional design and assessment practices. So thank you so much to all 3 of you for being here and joining in the conversation. Also in today's session, we have Megan Burnett, the Associate Director of CTSI, who's going to moderate and keep us on track. And of course, we are also joined by Professor Olivier Saint-Cyr, from the Faculty of Information, who has been teaching us about design thinking us and leading us through the process the past couple of days, really guiding our conversation about how we imagine the future of teaching and learning at the University of Toronto. And Olivier, I think I'm passing to you now.
Great, thank you, Allison, and thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. Another beautiful sunny day and a warm day in Toronto if you are in the city or around the city. I'm going to share my screen here and give you a 10-minute debrief on what we've done and what we've accomplished as a group of faculty member, and maybe some of you student as well in the graduate studies in this 15th annual symposium on teaching and learning. So we started with the theme of this symposium as designing for the future. And again, when we looked at this, and staff, thank you, Megan. When I was approached to get involved in this in the fall of 2021, the goal was really twofold. The first goal was to use a method and a process called design thinking in order to run the plenary session, the opening plenary session, and one concurrent session on day number 2. And the second goal was really to get people involved, to move away from kind of the traditional keynote sort of delivery format, where we move away from more of a keynote workshop format, where people do contribute to the data collection and the ideation and the session throughout the symposium. So, and this is what we've been doing. So in the opening plenary, we looked at discovering the problem space around designing for the future. And we've looked at somewhat starting the definition of that problem space with looking at opportunities. And then we went into a concurrent session yesterday morning, and which was really well attended. So thank you for those of you who attended. And today we're here to present to you the playback. So the title of this slide is It's Playback Time. And playback, when I worked in industry, is actually something we would do every other week on Friday afternoon. So for those of you who know about some of the principles behind agile software development and agile programming, we work on a 2-week cycle. And every Friday afternoon, after lunch, we would all get together in the conference room or the boardroom or the studio, depending on the days and how many people were coming. And we would be playing back what we had accomplished for in the last 2 weeks. And playbacks is all about storytelling. So it's about storytelling your design and putting some emotion and some relevant characteristics of your design with respect to users, and trying to give a sense to everybody in the room about what has been accomplished and where are we moving forward to in the next step. So we started with the opening plenary and we did a first round of data analysis. So this is the part that most of you did not see. I had a team of volunteers, Masters of Information, User Experience Design students from the Faculty of Information, which helped. So on Wednesday afternoon from 1 o'clock to about 4 or 5 o'clock, we crunched all that data. It was extremely chaotic, as many people can imagine, but that's the process, right? That's the process of creating divergent data and further converging it to something that makes sense. So, and we came up with a summary of opportunities that was the converged data from the opening plenary session. And then we did an ideation session on Thursday morning with almost, I believe at the peak of it, almost like 60 to 75-ish people who participated in that session using the data that was crunched on the previous day. Then we went into round 2 of the data analysis, which is also a part that happened behind the scene, where I've got the students again yesterday afternoon, and we wrote, we looked at these big ideas and we prioritized them and we thematized them, and we wrote the final playback documentation yesterday evening for the panel today. We also created a final board for our ideation to give you folks at the end of the session today. So here we are in the closing plenary and we're playing this back. I'm just going to show you the artifacts because I think this is amazing. We use Miro as a tool to actually create all this. And we started with these templates in the ideation session. And then this is the summary of the data. And then we had further templates to work with on the Thursday morning session, looking at big ideas and prioritizing, voting on these big ideas, which one are impactful, which one are feasible according to our perspective. And then today we have a final prioritization grid of all these ideas that were generated. Each one of these sticky notes here in that prioritization grid that you see is actually a big idea around designing for the future of teaching and learning. And these are the ideas that we further thematized yesterday evening, and we're going to be presenting to our panel today. So the final product is what we're going to present to you today. 3 summarized playback that will be commented by our panelists. I just want to give you a big thank, because when Allison and Megan approached me in the fall, my biggest worry and what I told them right away is that we can do all this, but I cannot tell you how it's going to turn out. It's not like one of those predefined keynote talk where I could tell you what I'm going to talk about and tell you how it's going to end. I just cannot tell you how this is going to turn out to be. And it all turns out great, to be honest. It turned out amazing, but it turned out amazing because of the participation of you folks. You are the one that generated the data that contributed to this process. So design thinking based on participation, it's a very participatory design thinking approach that we've gone through in the last two and a half days or so. I've put a summary here of all the nice tweets that I could find on Twitter about people posting their thoughts and their ideas around the symposium and around these design thinking exercise. So I really, really want to thank you, because the more we were getting on with this, the more I was seeing the data coming through, and the more I was feeling relieved. I said, yes, we're going to be able to have a closing plenary by the end of the symposium, and it's going to work out. But there's a special person that I want to give a shout out to, and this person here is on the call, and it's Christine. And I don't know Christine, but Christine, from what I gather, is a professor at University of Toronto Scarborough campus, I believe in Health and Society, the Health and Society department. But Christine has been so engaged in this symposium and so funny as well. Again, Christine, I don't know who you are, but I would really like to meet with you one day and talk about this, because it's been a delight to read your tweet and actually follow up the process. So Christine started with, when design thinking process you use in a course is reinforced in a teaching and learning symposium. And then she starts by saying, very fun and hands-on Miro board. Not wanting to leave the breakout room is a good sign. I've heard that from a lot of people, like, we want to stay in our breakout room. We want to stay on the board. We're all in it right now. But we had a timeline and we had to bring people back, right? And then look at this, like Christine, like I told people on the Thursday morning session, I says, if you have a pad of sticky note at home or a whiteboard or something, just draw some of your big ideas, even though you don't know how to draw very well or whatever. Like, and by the way, I'm not saying that Christine doesn't know how to draw well here. I'm just saying that she actually participated all the way, and she actually drew some of these big ideas on sticky notes, and she was going around looking at these big ideas. And this was my favorite tweet, after participating for 2 days in the symposium, beautiful days in Toronto, 2 days of high participation, because I've seen Christine participating in the board and all that. She goes and she starts reading books on design thinking. So how much more awesome can this get, right? So again, everybody participated, and this is just a kind of a special shout out, because I found these tweets very good and very, there's a great sense of humor in here and a great sense of involvement. So I just wanted to show to folks in the room, not to point out a particular individual, but show to people in the room that people did really get engaged in this symposium. And it was just amazing to see all this engagement. So thank you so much for participating and being the folks that have organically and use a bottom-up process to organically generate this data over the last 2 days. I would like to thank our volunteers. I had 14 students from the Masters of Information program and the Faculty of Information, 14 people who came to each of the sessions. Some of them also might be here this afternoon. I've invited them to the playback to see the final results. I also they came on Wednesday afternoon and on Thursday afternoon. We had 3 to 4 hour sessions on each days. And these people stayed on, they played with the Miro boards. They actually crunched all the data, analyzed all the data. And when we planned the symposium from the get-go, it was very, very, very important. And Allison and Megan know this, that I involved some of the students in our program, because they are so fantastic. I can just give them a task to do. They already know the design thinking process. They already know how to crunch data, analyze, produce affinity diagram, make thematic analysis. And then so we just needed to give them a task, explain to them the context of what it is, teaching and learning, designing for the future for teaching and learning. And then they just went on and they actually just did the whole thing and the whole crunching of the data and analyses. It was just amazing. So, and here you go, Christine, again, making a nice tweet here, taking great work for timing our chaos. So yes, because at the beginning, the data was really chaotic. So the final product of all this is a final board, which you will get the URL towards the end of the symposium. I don't want to give it to you today, right now, at this point, because I know all of you will go in there and start playing and start looking, and we got the remaining of the session to go through. But what we've did is we've summarized everything on one board, which is locked read-only view, which is going to be available for many weeks to come. The raw data from the opening plenary, the summary we've created, the raw data from the ideation session, the summary, and the final prioritization grid of ideas. So this is, people, I'm really proud to present to you your 2022 Teaching and Learning Symposium design thinking process on designing for the future of teaching and learning. So, and you will get the board at the URL to the board at the end of the session, and you'll be able to go peek in there and hopefully feel inspired for the year to come. And some people, just a one comment before I pass it on to Megan, some people have said we should try to do some of these sessions in person in the next year or two. We should try to reorganize some smaller sessions on design thinking in person if we can. And we are going to probably plan that in the CTSI programming over the next year or two. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating. It's been a great honor and privilege to run this keynote workshop for the last 3 days. And it all started with these 3 questions. What are you leaving behind? What are you taking forward? And what do you want to explore further? And at this point, I will pass it on to Megan so that we can hear from our wonderful panelists, their thoughts on these 3 questions. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Olivier. Everybody, hand for Olivier. The work that went into all of this has been phenomenal, and I'm sure you can see that. It wasn't just a lot of work, it was a commitment. There was a sustained energy that had to be brought to the work. We started working on this in October, and look at where we are. So kudos to all involved, but especially to Olivier. He had a vision and he followed it through. So well done. Now, at this point, what I would like to do is turn our attention to our wonderful panelists who have joined us this afternoon to firstly share their stories around the 3 questions that we use as our framing questions for the symposium this year. I liked how Olivier framed the notion of playing back around storytelling. I think that's really key, and I think that is what we are inviting our panelists to do shortly. So panelists, I will ask you to keep your stories when you're responding to the 3 questions to 5 minutes. And I'll use the same order that we are using for the playback responses later on. So we'll begin with Vice Provost Susan Mccann, then we'll move to Professor Rhonda Mcewen, and we'll end with Don Boys. So what are your stories? What are you leaving behind? What are you taking forward? And what do you wish to explore further? Susan.
There we go. Thanks so much. And thank you so much to CTSI for this amazing event. I attended a lot of it, actually. Usually with online conferences, I kind of dip in and out, but actually I cleared my schedule and was able to lurk in many of the sessions, and I really, really enjoyed it. And thank you to Olivier for leading us through the design thinking process and to his students. The output of this is actually fantastic input to my office for strategic planning. And so you all have done collectively, all of you, a huge service for me to take away with me a lot of really fantastic areas to work on and things that we want to think about how we can enable and support our instructors at the university, what we can put in place to enable you to do these fantastic things that you would like to take with you, and the things that you think we could be doing better. So I really appreciate it. I think what I'm going to be leaving behind, I hope, is is only ever getting to meet my students online. I was able to teach in person in the fall. It was a huge privilege to teach in person in the fall. And I was able to talk informally with students during the winter term. And they were just so appreciative of seeing a three-dimensional person and being able to interact with us and me with them. I find that that online teaching, I can do a lot around designing interactivity and things, but it tends to be transactional, and it's really hard to have those deeper conversations, especially with multiple people around a table in the online environment. And so that's part of what I'm going to, I hope, leave behind. I enjoy teaching online, and I'm sure I will still do some of that, but I really, really enjoyed teaching in person this year, and I'm looking forward to more of it. Do you want me to go on to taking with me? Okay, taking with me a lot more proficiency in educational technology, as I think we all have. And so while I thought I was relatively proficient in educational technology prior to the pandemic, I now I'm the proud owner of like 2 or 3 webcams, and I have one I prefer for this and one I prefer for that, and, you know, a ring light. I did not ever think I would need one of those. And so there's a variety of different equipment, but also strategies. And I think, like you, I was thrust into learning a lot fast about online teaching, and that forced me to be strategic about what I learned. It wasn't a bit of everything. It was, what did I need to know and when did I need to know it? And thank you to all the educational technologists that we have for helping to support, because that was hugely valuable to me, was having those people to call on when I needed them. So that's one thing I will be taking with me. And I think also just a better understanding about how to facilitate online interaction and getting students engaged online in a ways that I did online office hours before, but that was students who showed up because they had a question to ask. Now we had everybody showing up online, and how do you bring in those students who were not necessarily there to interact? How do you get them to engage and interact? And I think what I'd like to explore further is how to create a more seamless environment between what I do in class and what I do online. And maybe that means bringing in some of the stuff we do online into class, where students are online but in class with me in this. I don't know, but I'm thinking through that, because I think right now, and maybe other people sort of share this, operating in these multiple universes, it feels a bit like being in the Matrix or in the movie Tenet. If you've ever seen the movie Tenet, where time is like going backwards and forwards and people are moving backwards and forwards in time in the same place at the same time. I just feel like we are trying to, and we are asking our students to navigate and wayfind in multiple universes or in multiple realities at the same time. So it's like figure out how to operate the syllabus, not read the syllabus, but operate the syllabus, while and at the same time doing in-class activities, while at the same time doing. And one of the students I was hearing say in one of the accessibility sessions that we had this in the last couple of days, was that they just felt like they were being asked to do 5 things at once. Take notes, read, click on a Mentimeter while doing this, while doing this, while doing this. And how do we, in fact, I'm thinking about, how do I make my classes simpler rather than cooler? And really pick those things that are going to have the highest impact to do, and do them in a way that has some consistency for students, so that there is some predictability in what they are doing, and it gets to be a known rather than just new things all the time. So that's one of the things I'm thinking about exploring more, is that course design in those terms. Thanks very much.
Perfect. 5 minutes. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Susan. And what I heard there was some thinking around being strategic. I liked that very much. We're thinking about that as well in our own work in CTSI, and also maintaining a seamless connection between online experiences and in-person experiences. That's top of mind for us as well. Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, everyone, and what a beautiful day. In honor of this, I don't know if it's spring though, maybe it's springy summery, but in honor of that, I went with bright colors to try and keep us
Love it.
We're inside right now. But what a wonderful event. The participation has truly been mind-blowing. And I just want to commend all of you who turned up and participated and engaged. I saw you working on the mirror boards. I saw your engagement. It really did move me quite significantly to see you engage to this extent. I'm really proud of all of you. And I'm sure the work of our organizers, really, you've knocked it out of the park. As Olivier, as you were speaking, I was thinking, it is daunting to try and pull this off, not knowing exactly where the end point is. And I think that's a lesson in a way that I might pick up a little later in my comments. But this idea of kind of that uncertainty when you engage in these kinds of activity and embracing that and kind of really channeling it and moving forward. This has been a perfect example of how to do it well. So in my comments, I mean, some of what Susan said resonated as well, and you might hear bits of it trail into what I'll say. In terms of what I would leave behind, one of the things I in a previous life when I worked in consulting, we talked a lot about productivity and this idea of productivity. And I think what I want to leave behind is I think we've changed our impression of what productivity really can be and how we measure that. Measuring productivity has always been difficult, but I think in the last couple of years, being on remote, we've had to rethink that. But one of the things that comes to mind that I want to leave behind is not forming enough breaks. Not remembering that we need breaks, running meetings and sessions up one behind the other tightly, and not having that time to break. And I think, in that we were productive, which is amazing, but also in not taking the breaks, we lose the reflection time. And I saw it built into the sessions you ran, time to stop and pause and reflect on what we're doing versus just moving to the next thing. So that's something I hope to leave behind, taking the good of the productivity with the sort of not so good of not having enough break time and reflection time, which actually ends up being something about self-care, right? I don't know if you all felt that too, like just that we didn't take care of ourselves enough, even when we all walked 1 million kilometers in the beginning of the pandemic. Little by little, we would fall back into really bad habits and becoming quite sedentary. So that I want to leave behind. What would I take with me? One thing I would like to take with me is the things where online actually really worked well. And there were those times, and to consider the people for whom being remote actually did support. And I want to think about students who, for example, are commuter students, especially those who tend to live at UTM or UTSC, those who, students across the tri-campus who work as well as go to school. Especially in professional master's programs that Olivier and I engage with, we know this is a reality of our student set. And to remember that for them, sometimes we need to keep that balance and make it, Susan talked about having office hours remotely. That really supports not just the scenario we were in, but it supports some of those students in particular who could take a break from work and check in with their faculty and their peers, and then check back into work without having to deal with the commute. So there are moments I want to take with me a kind of a realization and being mindful of the fact that there are people and occasions where this does work very well. And in terms of exploring further, just two quick things. One, I think I'd like to explore further the pacing of innovation. So, I'm a tech tech researcher, and I'm really interested in seeing how technology support, but how we pace out, how we roll things out, that we all don't try cool things at the same time. Because for the student, it meant that, 5 different faculty were trying cool things at the same time. So a lot of innovation in one place. So maybe that was what I would take further, and I'd be interested to hearing how that flows later on. Thanks.
Wonderful comments, Rhonda. And I totally agree with you on 2 things. The pacing of innovation, absolutely. As a teaching support office, we were also trying to stay on top of everything that people were trying. And we have to think of the students' experience of that, right? So across 5 courses in a year, how many different tools are they engaging with? How many different processes are they experiencing? So that's a wonderful insight. And I love the notion of creating space. Thinking about those pauses, taking that time to create space. That's something I've really been thinking about quite a bit. Thank you so much for your comments. Dawn, we are moving on to you and your story.
Thank you, Megan, and thanks so much to Susan and Rhonda for their great comments. I will try to stick to 5 minutes. As usual, I've over-prepared. So first of all, I also want to sort of say how important it is that we're having this conversation. It feels like we're all pausing to take a collective deep breath and I'm finding it quite therapeutic. I feel like we have to have these conversations as part of decompressing and recovering and looking forward to better days ahead, I hope. I feel like I said that last year, but that maybe this year is for real. I just also want to thank the organizers, Allison, Megan, Olivier, Kelly, and others for their hard work that have made this possible. And thanks to all of you, as Susan and Ron have mentioned as well. The design sessions to me were just fascinating, and it's been amazing to read all of the ideas that were posted, and the other sessions have been great as well. So for the 3 questions, I have some answers as an instructor and then some sort of in my role in terms of supporting other instructors. So what am I leaving behind? The pandemic, I hope. And as others have said, the meeting online. I've been in the dean's office for 2 years, and there are still people I have not yet met face to face. So, and when I have, it's such a delight. It's so much, it's exciting to be able to say, oh, like that's what you look like in person. So even though I've been teaching in online and hybrid modes for several years, as well as in person, I'm always thinking about how to improve my course. So I actually have some specific things about things I want to leave behind and take forward. I've realized, these are practical things for me, using fewer videos, having more active learning, thinking about the total time a student's spending in my course in a week, especially for an asynchronous course. Not thinking of videos as lecture time with that I have to have a certain kind of quota of minutes per week or something. I want to think more about integrating activities that are not just watching videos. I do this, but I'm trying to be better about it. We talk about chunking lectures into short videos. What I want to do next, which I've done that for a long time, is to chunk sequences of course materials. So to think of a student's time in terms of, say, half-hour chunks. So what is it that they could do in half an hour? And especially with an asynchronous course, one of the great things about that is that they can choose when they have time to focus, when they're available and ready to do that. And I don't want to assume that time that they have available is 2 or 3 hours straight. It might only be half an hour, 45 minutes, and then they need to take a break. And so what can I do with that time that's productive and sort of self-contained, and then sequence those into, say, a larger module. The sessions I went to yesterday on H5P and Pressbooks were quite inspiring. I'm planning on learning more about both. I see H5P as being quite valuable for interactivity. Pressbooks I'm still not sure about, but I definitely want to learn more about. I also want to do more with Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. I think I've been doing a fair amount of it already, but not in a very informed, intentional way. So I want to make sure that I take more care with that. Let's see. I think I'll switch now to my other role so my position as the director of the Arts and Science Online Learning Academy started on April 1st, 2020. So literally days after the pandemic began. It's been one of the most challenging and rewarding periods of my career, and I am extremely grateful to be able to help with that. So one thing I'm hoping we can leave behind collectively is the need for constant crisis management and short-term thinking. And at the same time, keeping the agility and the open-mindedness that has come out of this period. Not everything we tried worked well, but now we have time to reflect and analyze and iterate and plan. I'd also like to leave behind the, I think, collective temptation to make generalizations. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what students and instructors want in order to help them with their teaching and learning. And this symposium has been fantastic for that, as Susan mentioned as well, even though it's like drinking from a fire hose of feedback in a good way. On Wednesday evening, I'll tell you, I spent hours reading all of the Post-it notes on the Miro boards from the opening plenary. I couldn't stop reading them. It's funny, and I really noticed, it's funny how many things were listed under both leaving behind and taking forward, and sometimes also under explore further. So asynchronous courses, hybrid courses, online tests, lecture recordings, discussion boards. So it's clear there's no one size fits all. And from the design sessions and also from consultations that we've done in arts and science, it's clear that people like having options. They don't like feeling forced into something that they see as not being the right fit for them as a student or as an instructor. And so I'll finish off by just saying one thing I really want to do in terms of exploring further is, asking how do we give students and instructors flexibility and choices while also managing expectations. We can't do everything for everyone all the time. But what can we do, especially keeping in mind instructor workload and mental health? I absolutely loved the design exercise where we were asked to tag ideas with impact and feasibility and then put them into quadrants. And I think that's exactly what we have to keep doing. And what's going to have the most impact and how feasible is it? I know we're going to get to that section in a minute, so I will stop there.
That's great, Dawn. Thank you very much for those insights. And indeed, we are going to be building on most of your comments shortly. And I loved very much your insights around now we're out of the crisis, we're managing the fire. There might still be a fire over here burning away, but we now can create that space, going back to what Rhonda said, to iterate, to reflect, to build on the best of what we've lived through. And I totally hear what you say about managing expectations. This was something that resonated throughout the boards, both days and both sessions. People said, we've got all these choices, all these options, but how do we make all of this manageable, both for me as the instructor and for my students who are experiencing all of these approaches? Thank you, Dawn, for those excellent insights. I think now I'm going to pass it back to my fine colleague, Olivier, who is going to start what is called the playback, the real actual playback portion of our closing plenary. And then each of our panelists are going to respond to each of 3 playback themes. So
Great.
Olivier, over to you.
Thank you, Megan. We have 3 playbacks, and this is the first one here, which is on institutional support and for flexible teaching and learning. And Susan Mccann is going to be the lead for this playback. We put 4 themes in this playback. The first theme is around flexible teaching and learning. So there were several ideas here, and I'm not going to read through all the ideas, as you can imagine. We can give you the link to this closing plenary playback towards the end. But there were quite a lot of ideas around how do we think about and how do we design for the future in which teaching and learning can become more flexible. The second theme that we had in this playback is involving more parties in teaching and learning. So team teaching courses focus on social learning for relational aspects of learning, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we involve other parties on teaching and learning, maybe in our own teaching or at the program level or in your specific unit? The third theme that we had for this playback is around rethinking and enhancing instructor support. So this was a comment that was made yesterday in the opening, in the design session, actually. And we didn't have that theme at all at the beginning from our data analysis on a Wednesday afternoon. And we ended up adding that theme because it was mentioned as comments in the chat in the design session yesterday morning. And it just goes to show you how flexible design thinking can be. Yes, you have to use data that you collected from previous steps and from your users, but there's also a lot of space to be to add things on the fly and things of things. One of the aspects that was mentioned during that theme, which was really interesting, and you see some of these ideas are ranked really, really high in terms of impact and feasibility, is the fact that the data that we collected in the last few days could actually have some biases in it. And I completely agree. One of the comments that was mentioned by Jennifer Murdoch, I believe, I'm not sure of the last name here. You can help me, Jennifer, if you're online, is that some of the faculty members who are burnt out may not have participated in this design thinking session. And they might have had very good ideas on how to deal with the fact that they were burnt out, or how to deal with designing for the futures, but they might have been too burnt out to participate and to actually show up. So this is something we have to consider when we do these design exercises, is the fact that as data organically grows, then it's obviously showing the perspective of the people who are participating, but there's a bunch of other perspective also that may not have been captured in this data. So it's very important to acknowledge that. The last theme that we have in this sort of first playback is enhancing learning supports. And so we talk about technology, course design, and ideas along those ways. So basically, what we've done is we've accumulated these 4 themes, and here are some of the ideas here. And again, the yellow dots are impact and the blue dots are feasibility. And we've asked people to vote and to give us their thoughts about whether they think these ideas are impactful and feasible. And we gave this data to our panelists yesterday evening so that they can prepare their response. So under institutional support and flexible teaching and learning, some of the bigger ideas that come out of here is offer courses in a wider variety of format and length, offer opportunities for hybrid remote experiential learning, explore different approaches in assessment and evaluation, like ungrading, for example, enable students mentorship at the program and course levels, enhance instructor support to enable innovative teaching without burnout and feeling of isolation, and enhance support for students who miss significant coursework. For example, making it easier for students to retake courses or to retake exams, or to, let's say, have more trial on assignments. So with that being said, I'm going to now invite Professor Susan Mccann to open up the discussion on this playback.
Thanks, Olivier. Can you hear me okay? Super. So thank you so much for inviting me to comment on some of the major themes that arose. As I said, I found this fascinating because this is what we've been hearing, but it's really great to see it in a frame where we can see where people think that the impact and the feasibility are really high on these themes. In terms of, I would say, flexibility overall and the concepts around flexibility, and perhaps it's the self-selection of people who come to a teaching and learning symposium. Of many of the themes were very student-centered, and I love that, the idea of supporting our students through flexible learning, flexible assessment, making sure that our modes of teaching are supporting all of our students. I also think that there's a flip side, and Dawn pointed to this, and I see a couple of notes about it in the chat, where flexibility has to be balanced with resources, time, and work. And so how much flexibility versus, and yes, we can find strategies that are lower resources and time impact, and highly impactful for students. But there does come a point where multiple adding more degrees of freedom for students can sometimes be a load on faculty and TAs, and doing your office hours at 2 o'clock in the morning and things like this, to make sure that every student has an opportunity to connect with you. So I'm very mindful that when we think about flexibility, we also have to think about resource implications and time implications. There's some really interesting ideas here, particularly around things like assessment and evaluation, which is an area that I'm deeply interested in, both as an administrator, but also as a scholar. And concepts like ungrading, which have real interest and have been demonstrating some impact. But again, there are time implications of going with that kind of direction. I believe, and I have now read through the grading practices policy multiple times to make sure that there is nothing in policy that is precluding innovation that is that has real value for students. Okay, and so we want to make sure that there are not institutional impediments to that. At the same time, we also know that students, that we utilize grades for far more than simply giving feedback to students. We also utilize them for a certification of learning outcome, and the way that we tell other people that students have demonstrated mastery of the learning outcomes in our courses is typically through that grading system. So making sure that our assessments and our evaluations are both serving formative purposes, and it really is assessment for learning is a principle that we are adhering to, and having that flexibility to support student learning, and at the same time making sure that by the end of the course, we are able to give the student a grade that reflects their demonstrated mastery of those learning outcomes, and that we are thinking really intentionally about what learning outcomes are at the core of our course, not just all the nice to haves, but what are the really core things. And if we think about that, we can actually boil down that core to a really small essence, and then allow students to demonstrate and to explore ways of learning in our courses that go well beyond those core learning outcomes and provide feedback on that to them that's very formative. And so I'm taking away from this particular one some very interesting ideas of areas within flexible learning that we should be exploring more deeply at the institution around types of learning that should be enabled, but also at the same time considering the resource implications when we engage in, for example, varieties of formats and lengths and so on. Because we can't just keep doing more. And so we have to think about, if we're going to offer, for example, courses in multiple formats, maybe we need to think about not offering some other courses that we have been teaching. Thanks.
Thanks, Susan. Are there any comments from our other two panelists before we move on to Rhonda's playback?
I mean, Susan covered it so beautifully. I would add, and because actually, as Susan spoke, it came to mind. And Olivier teased this up for us earlier. Flexibility, there's the course outline that we develop, and then there's this idea about flexibility. And as we build in the learning outcomes, and we kind of have a very prescribed approach for 12 to 13 weeks, what we're going to do. This idea of having a little bit more open-endedness built into the courses so that we meet our learning outcomes, but we appreciate that we learn as we go, and really taking design principles into mind that we practiced in the last couple of days, to see that sometimes we don't have a perfect end yet in mind, but it will come together, and making sure there's room in the course for that. That just came to mind.
Thank you. Don.
Yeah, a quick comment. I mean, Susan is the policy guru, master,
Yes.
let's say. And I mean, it was nice to hear her say, and I agree that, and I'll be careful how I say this, but there's often ways that things can be done within existing policies. Like when I was looking through some of the Post-it notes and things, some things it occurred to me are already possible, like they're feasible. It just may be that I wonder if some instructors feel as though they need permission to do things that may already be under their kind of control. Having said that, I agree with her that, I think we have to be careful when those changes are made. I think I saw something in the chat about like, let's not do that during the term,
Right.
like, because it can get chaotic. And I would really encourage, if you're thinking of those kinds of changes, this is what I've done before, is to talk to your associate chair or equivalent, talk to CTSI, faculty liaisons, people like that, to kind of bounce ideas off about like, what kind of impact might this have? What kind of unintended consequences might this have? But to really, just as much as we can, allow a bit more creativity with the way that we're designing things.
Terrific. Wonderful insights. Thank you. Olivier.
Thank you so much for all of you for giving us your thoughts on this first playback. So I'm going to share my screen here. Give me one moment. And I just put a note in the chat that we will send you the URL for all of this, but more towards the closing plenary, because we know how excited people get when you start sharing sticky notes and URL with people, and then they go in there and they start looking and all that. So, but you will have all of this data for sure. The second playback is around enhancing student support. And we have 3 themes in this playback that contain several ideas that were generated by our participants. The first theme is around mindfulness around student accessibility needs. I think this is something that I've seen quite a bit in the opening plenary session on Wednesday. There was a lot of discussion around accessibility, UDL, making course material more accessible, looking how we do live captioning in our lectures, looking at automating accessibility potentially in terms of checkpoints, making sure that we have the right tools to do so. There's definitely, I can sort of comment on this in a sense that all of us worked on online for the past 2 years, and I worked online quite a bit as well. I've used tools like Miro, Mural, the same type of tools that we've used in the symposium today to teach some of my classes, and they work well for some students, but they don't work well for everybody. So there's definitely a need to look at mindfulness around student and accessibility needs. Going online taught us a whole bunch of accessibility features that we might have not known before, or we knew, but we didn't really know how to integrate them in our classroom. So there's a lot of ideas here around how do we start integrating some of those online accessibility features into our classroom or into online toolings that we're going to keep teaching with for the next few years. The next theme is around collaboration with students on processes and tools. What we call in teaching and learning students as partners. And I have to say I'm a big fan of this because, as I mentioned in the opening plenary, I do involve my students in a lot of design thinking sessions, not just for my own courses and the topics and the materials that they have to know, but I often do town halls and I often do sessions with our co-op students who return from their term, and I want to get their feedback. I want them to have a voice into the programming of my courses and into the topics and the material that I cover. So affirming student voices was a very, very prominent idea that got duplicated in many other themes. Starting every class with some kind of collaboration. Students that help us design certain components of the class. Rubric here is a specific examples, but it could be other aspects as well. Collate and use long life student learning activities data to drive learning activities. So again, don't take these ideas for granted word by word. Some of them may be feasible, less feasible. Some of them may also be absurd sometimes, or not so doable, or a little bit of a fantasy world. But in design thinking, a very fundamental principle is behind every absurd idea or idea that's a little bit of a fantasy type of everything is good, it often uncovers a need and a reality that we can further explore. So when you read these stickies and you read these ideas, I really encourage you to often just go beyond just the words that are on the stickies, but what's the general sense here? What's the idea that we can further explore and unpack? The last theme for this playback 2 is rethinking student engagement. So again, affirming student voices was here, focusing on social learning or relational aspect of learning, outreach to the community, guest lectures, real life, authentic experience, involve all senses. I love that one. It's being maybe more holistic in the way that we teach our students. Paper airplane, students throwing airplanes at each other with ideas on them. Kind of like that. Maybe I'll try that in my class next time, like start the class with paper airplane throwing. Increase opportunities for remote and hybrid experiential learning. I mean, look at how many votes this idea got. It really gotten people's attention in terms of the yellow stickies and the blue stickies, which again are impact and feasibility. And we've been talking about experiential learning a lot in the symposium as well. So there's definitely some opportunities to further explore this. And we've got the final prioritization grid here for this playback 2. So at this time, I'm going to invite Professor Rhonda Mcewen to lead us into this playback discussion.
Thank you very much, Olivier. I love this. This particular group is perfect for me. I actually, on reflection, I liked it. I started with the third theme when I was thinking through this. I'm rethinking student engagement because I feel like it did cover some of the others. Mainly in this affirmation, we kept hearing that over and over, affirming student voices, involving students more. And one thing I thought about as I reflected on it was, sometimes using our feedback in courses from students. So, I sometimes before I open that, like, looking at what comes out of the summary at the end of a course, I hold my breath when I click the link to open it, just because in my mind I have a feeling about my course and I'm pretty happy, and then I go in there and it's like, but there's a way to not always just focus on as you go, thinking about the student and engaging them, but even after the course is done, to reflect using the comments that we get as feedback for our courses, and actually seeing that as a form of taking that engagement. It may not be for those same students, but for the next group. And so taking a long game, where we get very focused on one course at a time, the one we're in. But as we evolve a course and grow a course and, change the focus and give ourselves time to play with different ideas and take some experiment, it's a good idea, I think, to think about how we use that feedback as a way of hearing voices that may not have come up during the term, but that we get at the end. And it's an affirmation to take a hard look at that feedback and decide what we can do with it for the next group that we work with. And I see that as an opportunity to hear the student and give them that agency even after the course is completed. So that was something that really resonated with me. Now, I'm a sensory researcher, right? So my work is in tactile interfaces, so touch. I do a lot on visual when I do work in VR, and a lot of sensory work in terms of vestibular and proprioceptive sensing. And so I love. I know it only got one sticky, but involving all the senses really was one that worked for me. When I was much younger, if we went on any kind of trip or visit or had an experience, my mother would say, to say to my brother and I, okay, tell me what you thought of that, but don't just tell me good or, because, when you're a teenager, you just say good, bad, terrible, fantastic, whatever. But she said, tell me what it tasted like, what it sounded like, what it smelled like, what the thing you remember seeing that was most important, and something that maybe you touched. It might have been wind on your skin. It might have been sand under your feet. And I think maybe from that early guidance, my mom led me into thinking about the senses as I involved technology in my research. But if a student reflects on our classes, maybe we can have them in the class think about the things, and we could try and use these things in our classes to involve the full sensory experience of learning. Online, it's hard because it comes down to visual, but sound is available to us, and combining visual and auditory pieces and materials and media into our courses is a way to actually trigger cognition and memory. And that comes from research. So I really, really enjoyed seeing that. The other one that really affected me as I read it was the idea of the communities of learning for instructors. It came up in the one Susan talked about, but I wonder in that second one, collaboration. Think about these hubs, not just for instructors like ourselves, but to think about hubs for students and to encourage them to really engage with each other and collaborate, and then use it as a source for our courses. And that allows them to therefore take part in the design. And there are limits because we do have curriculum to deliver, but there might be ways that we rethink how we assess. There were some great comments here about starting classes with collaboration and teaching students how to collaborate. They talked about in this section too, getting ready for the job market and better preparation with EL opportunities, experiential learning opportunities. And this might be a way to do that, teaching them how to actually collaborate by doing it in our classes. So seeing EL not just as a thing you do as part of the course, but it's integrated into the various aspects of the course. So I thought that was really great. And just on accessibility, I do work on cognitive disability, people with cognitive disabilities and some learning challenges. And the idea that anything we design not just supports those students who have a specific need, but it actually helps all the people in the class. This idea of a curb cut, helping not just those who have, a physical disability come from a street side onto a sidewalk, but really then all the other people we didn't even think of in designing that particular intervention who will benefit from that, people pulling a suitcase, somebody with a stroller, so just this idea that accessibility isn't just for the students who are registered in accessibility, but when we design accessibility well into our courses, it actually supports all the students.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rhonda, for all those comments. And I loved your insight around student feedback and the importance of hearing directly from the students about their experiences in a course and using that to frame our rethinking of how we engage them. Thank you for that. Any comments from the other two panelists regarding enhancing student supports? Anything to add? Or Susan?
So I'll just throw out one idea that I've used in the past, which is on occasion, I have hired a couple of students from my class who have just finished my class to work with me for the summer on redesigning a laboratory or designing some, thinking about the redesign of some aspect of the course with me, having just experienced it. So that's another way to bring, you can do works through work study or something like that. Another way to bring the student voice into the course design.
Right. Brilliant. Love that suggestion. I know other instructors who do something similar as well. Dawn, did you have anything to add? And it's fine if not.
Not really. I'm good. It was very well said.
That was beautifully said. Thank you for those comments. And Dawn, I think I'll pass it back to Olivier. He's going to do your playback intro first.
Great. Thank you, Megan. So the third and last playback is around teaching creatively and accessibly with digital assets and online tools. So the first theme that we have in here is reimagining physical classrooms and learning spaces. So I think as we all come back to the physical classroom, Some of us came back in the fall, some of us in the winter, different timelines, but we all felt like there was some advantages of online toolings that we were losing when we're physically in a space, while really probably enjoying being back in that physical space and getting rid of the disadvantage of online tooling. So there's a balance here that we kind of, I'm sure like our minds was kind of going back and forth here. For example, for me personally, I really like sending things in the chat on Zooms because all the students could have a URL that they can click on and start working on something. I find when I go in the physical classroom, it's a little harder to do this. I can post it on Quarkus and all that, but it's not as convenient as just opening a chat box and then sending it and everybody gets it instantly, right? So this whole idea of creating flexible learning classroom, there was an idea about outdoor teaching. It probably will work really, really well today, maybe not on January 15th. Might work well also with small classes, maybe not large classes. But there are people who have done outdoor teaching in our faculty, for example, with our Bachelor's of Information students, because we only have a class of 26 students. So that was quite neat. Integrating or integrated learning spaces and designing and advocating for more active learning spaces on campus, which I know is an ongoing effort as part of the Transforming the Educational Landscape project. The second theme was around teaching accessibly and creatively with online digital tools and assets, which is really the main overarching theme of this playback. Integrating technology in one place, increasing opportunities again for remote and hybrid collaboration. There was this idea of learning pod. Student can take a course in a week, month, or even a year. So rethinking how people can take courses as learners. The last theme was reimagining student assessment. So we've all struggled with this, I'm sure, when we all went online with midterms and finals and take-home exams and quizzes and et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of things here. There was some ideas again that we talked about before about ungrading, about student designing rubric or helping us designing some assessment, give student agencies in choosing and designing their learning artifact, give options for moving pass and fail assessment-based courses, et cetera, et cetera. So in this theme, really, the main aspects that come around is to advocate for more active learning spaces on campus and design better spaces that support active learning. Reimagining what counts as learning spaces, right? Flexible learning environment. Integrating access to technology and the support for technology in the classroom in one, what people refer to as a one-stop hub. I know that's difficult to do, but it would have a very high impact potentially. Advocating for and designing new approaches to assessment, exploring how technology and enhanced experiential learning can happen in our classroom, expanding further how technology can enhance social and interactive learning and peer-driven learning, and exploring further how digital learning supports student in different meaningful ways. So I'm going to invite Dawn Boyes now to comment on this third playback.
Thank you so much, Olivier. There's so much I could say about so many of these, but so I'll apologize in advance. I don't think I'll have time to get through all of them, but I tried to pick out some ones I thought that had a lot of stickers on them or just seemed to really jump out at me. So the reimagining what counts as a learning space and the flexible learning environment aspect I found quite fascinating. One thing that's come up a lot in our consultation sessions is that students really need places on campus where they can go to attend an online course. They have to be able to easily transition. I mean, imagine this, from an in-person course to an online course, ideally within 10 minutes between classes, potentially. And they have to have the option to be able to speak in those online classes without worrying about bothering somebody, if they're just sitting in the library or something like that. so we have that's one way of thinking of that. Another is the active learning spaces on campus. And anyone who's spent time in My Hall 150 knows that's a great example of how, or even the other Teal classrooms in that building, what great examples they are for active learning design. I haven't taught in 150, but I have taught in one of the rooms on the 4th floor, I think it was. And, it does make a real difference when you have a room designed for flexible teaching. So one that I've used was for a 4th year course, a capstone group project course, where there's tables they can gather around, they have screens available, there's technology that helps facilitate their conversations for them to be able to share things with each other. So it can have a really meaningful impact to be able to have that kind of creativity enhanced by the room around them. And this goes along with flexible learning spaces, which could also potentially mean things like live streaming or blended learning while you're speaking to students in the room. One thing I will mention is that I'm on the TIL advisory board. It's the Transforming the Instructional Landscape initiative. And we happen to have a meeting on Monday. So we talk about these things. And I also have, all through the pandemic, I've had regular meetings with Steve Bailey, the Director of Learning Space Management, who's deeply invested in sorting through ways to make better use of these things. So those are ongoing conversations, and I'm lucky to be involved in those. And the idea of a one-stop hub that's come up in terms of supporting technologies and things, I don't know if this is the same reaction Olivier had, but it's kind of like, that would be great, but U of T is so big. It's like, how about a network of hubs? There's like, let's see, there's CTSI, there's people in engineering and in arts and science and other divisions, and LSM. So I think it's important to be able to coordinate with each of these groups and be able to direct people as needed so that they feel like it's one big hub, perhaps. So I could go on, but I think we're getting short on time. So I think I will, as tempting as it is, I think I will leave it there.
Fair enough. You had 30 seconds, so your instincts were right. So well done, Don. Thank you for those comments. I invite Rhonda or Susan to jump in with any thoughts around teaching creatively and accessibly with digital tools.
I would just picking up on things in the chat right now.
Yeah.
With the mobile, thinking how we can use phones, because students mostly have them. Mindful, of course, of anybody that might not, but at this stage, we probably can assume most people do. And thinking about, how we can incorporate that into the classroom, I think is a really great idea.
Wonderful.
In the interest of time, I won't add anything more, but those are all very good points. And yes, absolutely. Creating a larger variety of classrooms of different sizes and capabilities, rather than a one-size-fits-all classroom is, and then making sure we match the right pedagogy to the right room, what the instructor intends to do, and trying to find, to the best degree that we can, a match between the professor and a room that's available.
Wonderful. Olivier, any final thoughts? We're in the home stretch. Thank you, panelists, for all of your wonderful insights around your playback areas. We knew the timing was tight. We knew we had a lot to talk about in this closing plenary. So appreciate very much that you were able to fit in such rich comments in the time that we had. We do have 5 minutes left, and this is where we can open it up. If you have questions, observations, comments, please feed them through the chat, or you can come off mute if you are daring and want to ask a question directly of any of our three panelists or of Olivier. So I open up the floor to anyone who has something they would like to say or ask. Any good teacher waits.
Just start cold calling on people.
Yeah, just go through the participant list. And
we could do a think, pair, share.
Sure, let's open up some breakout rooms in the 2 minutes we have left. Yeah, for sure. Active learning rooms for sizes, yes. For mid-sized classes, yes, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we heard this, oh, sorry, Susan, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I know that UTSC, for example, has under construction a really fantastic new facility that I'm not sure how big some of those rooms will be. But yes, this is, I think, what we're hearing is we need more of these kinds of rooms. We have them in my hall, 36 to 72, and there's some at UTSM and there's some rooms at UTSC. But we have that gap between about 70 and 460.
Right.
And I think nobody imagined that we would want active learning classrooms bigger than 70.
Right.
And now that's being proved wrong. I think there's
Yeah, we're designing a new building at UTM, and that exact comment came up, and we actually we revamped what we were going to do. We have one classroom that can do it, and now we're going to get 2 more in the new building. So I think that's a sweet spot. Yeah, that's
wonderful.
Yeah, and it is about getting the right mix of technology in the room. I have a graduate student who's working in this area of active learning classroom design, and we've visited places at other universities that have failed as active learning. They've been designed as active learning classrooms, they've failed. And so learning those lessons and not repeating them, and making sure that when we design them for active learning, it really, really works.
Quick comment in the chat about ungrading. Would anyone like to weigh in with either their definition of ungrading or thoughts about ungrading in 2 minutes or less?
I'm happy to talk a little bit about it. This is not a new concept in K through 12. So if people are familiar with Montessori or the Sudbury School in Massachusetts or the Summerhill School in the UK, that idea, I had a student in one of my classes who never took an exam until she was in grade 11. All of her assessment was done through ungrades, which was her and her teachers developing an understanding of where she was at in her learning, and that it was all fed back to her in that kind of narrative, not as a grade. And in ungrading, what you're basically doing is the student is informing and working on their metacognition to come up with their grade, but typically is arriving at the grade that probably you would have given them, but is arriving at it on their own and therefore has a much better understanding of where that assessment is coming from and a much better sense of self-assessment on their learning. And so it is, in the worst form, it can be just tell me what your grade should be and I'll write it down kind of thing, but that's not what we mean. It's really actually should be that metacognitive development of the student during the course that helps them to develop a sense of their grade, and then they feed it to the instructor.
Thank you, Susan. Well done. That was succinct and clear. Appreciated. Lots to explore, lots of food for thought to build on as we leave the 2022 Teaching and Learning Symposium. We are just about at time. Please join me in thanking our panelists, Susan Mccann, Rhonda Mcewen, and Dawn Boys. Appreciate you spending some time with us to further our conversations around design thinking and designing for the future of teaching and learning at U of T. And please join me in thanking Olivier one more time. The structure, the whole theme of the symposium rested on his shoulders and he pulled through. And on your shoulders as well. Give yourselves a hand. You did a whole lot of work over the past 3 days, and we recognize that and we thank you for it. Thank you all for being here. I've got just a couple of things to close off the afternoon. If I can get Kelly to throw up the slides. We have thank you to everyone who participated, and I'll ask Kathleen or Kelly to put in the chat the link to our webpage where we list the names of the people who are on not just the organizing committee, but also the many volunteers who helped host concurrent sessions and provide support to presenters and a range of technical support, and the amazing students that Olivier brought to work with us around the design thinking sessions from his Masters of Information UDX program. Thank you to all of you. I really need to take a moment to single out a member of our team in CTSI who is the symposium coordinator, and she led the work to build the program, to bring in the right people, to inform the concurrent sessions, but also to lead the plenary. And she worked with Olivier on coming up with the design thinking framework. Please put your hands together for Kelly Gordon. Kelly is our coordinator, programs and strategic initiatives. Kelly made this happen, really, with Olivier, but truly. Please, Kelly Gordon is amazing, and we owe her a lot. The success of the symposium is due to her efforts. Yeah, absolutely. But again, thank you to everyone. Please check the website. And then some final announcements. I actually can't see them, Kelly. They're too small. I don't know what the first one is. I think you've spot. I don't know what's wrong with my display.
It's our feedback form, Megan.
It's a feedback form. So you're going to get it in the chat. We're going to send the link to your evaluation form. Why don't you do this, Allison? Because honestly, I can't read it.
Happy to. Thanks, Megan. So Kathleen's put the link in the chat as well. So of course, we are keen to know what you thought and what we can do next time. So please take a moment when you have one and fill out the online evaluation. And just a couple of highlights on upcoming events in CTSI. We'd love to continue the teaching and learning conversation with you. A couple of them are noted here, coming up on May 25th, the third in our academic resilience series. This one focused at the curriculum program level and building academic resilience across a program of study and its curriculum. And we've got a session coming up on teaching awards for those of you who are thinking about how one thinks in those terms and puts them together and puts a file together what a path towards a teaching award might look like. That session's on June 2nd. And a big event coming up to please stay tuned for. It's got mentioned, probably I've heard it a couple times during the symposium, certainly Cheryl mentioned in her earlier remarks, the AQ course, a little more intensive work, but leads to a certificate in effective university instruction. We're doing the in-person version this year, but both versions have lots of resources, both for whether you're thinking about things in an online course or an in-person course. We'll launch in the fall in September, and soon, because very, very soon, we'll be reaching out to get our cohort of instructors in place for that programming. And I just have to say thank you again to Olivier students, all of you for participating, because the design thinking really fell on all of you and all of the presenters and all the other sessions. All of our volunteers who really made this happen. Yeah, so we've already given a big shout out to Kelly, but she really deserves it. So thank you.
Kelly's amazing. Thank you all for joining us over these 3 days. It's been a privilege, and we hope to continue to work with you in the months ahead. Let's keep the design thinking going. We have work to do, and I'm excited for it. Thank you all. And special thanks again to our panelists. Enjoy the beautiful weather. Get outside.
Yes.
Do something in the sunshine. Thank you, everyone.